Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Perspectives podcast brought to you by the Black Pride Network, also known as BPN. My name is Richard Brethour-Bell. I am the founder, president, and CEO of BPN, as well as the host of the Perspectives podcast. Joining me today is my partner in crime, Dr. Ryan Starzyk. Ryan is the vice president of BPN, as well as the producer of Perspectives. Today, he's joining me in a discussion about Black fatigue. I thought it was important to get the white people involved in this, let them understand this isn't just a Black person problem. This is an everybody problem. So today, Ryan is joining me as co-host. Say hello to the people, Ryan.
Richard, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm very excited to be here with you, and I am so honored to be part of this magical journey that we've been going on together to launch the Black Pride Network.
Absolutely, Ryan. Couldn't have done this without you, so I'm glad that you're here. Let's go ahead and get started. You want to pull up some slides? And y'all, this is not going to be a TED talk because Black fatigue is too broad of a topic to discuss, to have one discussion about it. So we're going to come back to this on another occasion. But I wanted to whet your appetite and talk about something that few people are not even aware that exists, but affects millions of people worldwide. And that's Black fatigue. Black fatigue, we've seen the protests. We know that it's an intergenerational impact of systemic racism on the physical and psychological health of Black people. And we're not the only ones that recognize this, because now we have a governor and other governors and other politicians who are trying to erase DEI. They don't want to acknowledge that Black fatigue exists. It is the fatigue that comes from the pain and anguish of living with racism every single day of your life. It is about fatigue, being fatigued by those who are surprised when we express outrage with no action that such inequity still exists. We'll have people who say, things are much better now than they used to be. Well, you guys, your people have come so far, as if to say, isn't it enough now? As if to say inequities don't exist. What's your take on those? I'm sure you've heard those discussions as well, Brian.
Thank you for that question, Richard, and thank you for making this great introduction. First and foremost, what I think that we all need to realize is that white people really need to stop trying to continue criminalizing and enslaving Black people in modern day society, because that's exactly what's happening with these anti DEI legislations. It's their way of circumventing their racist views and saying, oh, well, we're against DEI. We're not against Black people. We're against DEI. No, you actually are. That's exactly the very definition of racism. And you are perpetuating a stereotype that is holding all of society down further and further. So, what do I think? I think that white people need to stop trying to sugarcoat their real, true intentions with legislation and just say it. They're just racist and they don't want to see people of color progressing in society today.
Absolutely. Black fatigue is the constant fatigue of not even knowing whether you're going to come home or not. Black people have given the talk to their children for generations. If a white police officer pulls you over, here's what you do. Here's what you don't do. As our younger generation are coming up, they're like, wait a minute, why do we have to obey them? Why do we have to make ourselves smaller to make them feel bigger? And we always tell them the same thing each generation. It's okay to be right, but let them have this moment, because the most important thing is that you come home and that you are alive. So that is why we give Black people, Black people give their children the talk. It means literally saving lives. That is what Black fatigue is about. Next slide,
And
Ryan.
it's interesting. And Richard, you bring up a very good point because, you know, white families, when they're growing up, when their children are growing up, it they have the talk, but it's about the birds and the bees.
Right.
People of color
It's
have
a
the talk.
different talk.
It's about being pulled over by the police and what you do.
Right.
Think about that for
Yeah.
a second. Between sex and possible death, those are the two options.
Absolutely.
Those are the two differentials that communities are going through right now in this country. Let that sink in for just a second.
Absolutely. It's so true. I am in love with this book by Mary Frances Winter. She says something that resonates throughout the African American community, that Black people are quite literally sick and tired of being sick and tired. I cannot tell you how many times I heard my aunts, my grandmother say those very words. It is something that is rooted in our community, and it really does sum up Black fatigue. It is just exhausting. It is physically, mentally, and emotionally draining to even have to explain racism, to point out racism, only to have our white counterpart tell us, without the experience that we go through as people of color, tell us it's not racism. I remember, everybody I'm sure remembers the interview, the Oprah interview with Meghan and Harry, and then Harry's wonderfully written book. Look, Black folks like Harry. Harry got him a Black woman and said, "Look, I will leave the crown behind for this woman." We like, go ahead on, Harry. But in their interview and in Harry's book, neither Harry nor Meghan, or including their Netflix special, never called anybody a racist. And yet, Prince William, Dr. Phil, they're all saying, "Oh, what she went through was not racist," although they have absolutely no idea what Meghan encountered. They have absolutely no idea what it's like to experience racism from the perspective of a Black person. And yet, they feel comfortable in saying what is and what isn't racism, what is and what isn't a legitimate experience. That is exhausting.
Let's look at what the definition of what racism is based on the Oxford languages. Prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is minority or marginalized. That's exactly
Absolutely.
what DEI is trying to combat. So when you say you're
Exactly.
against DEI, you're a pro racism person. That's just the bottom line.
Exactly.
The very definition tells you that.
Absolutely. I would encourage anyone who wants to learn more about Black fatigue to get Miss Winter's book. She actually goes into detail about the mental health and your physical health that's affected with dealing with racism on a daily basis. I love when she says that, look, let's call it what it is. It's not microaggressions, it's just aggression. You know, um, those words are so powerful to me. It's like, why do we have to try to minimize the effect that it's actually having on Black people? It is aggression. It's not a micro assault. It's just assault. She words this so beautifully. And if you want to have a better understanding about Black fatigue, you need to get this book by Mary Frances Winters. So, how do we get here? How do we get to this point? Unfortunately, schools in America did not adequately teach Black history, which is rooted in American history. Um, I know when I was growing up and going to school in the late 70s and early 80s, Black history consisted of Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. And although they were wonderful human beings and incredibly courageous, our story didn't start with them. The 1619 Project, which is a book that's banned, let's just get every book that's banned. Let's find out the list of books that are banned and just get those books. But the 1619 Project helps us to understand the root of slavery in the United States. So we're talking about going way back to 1619. So if you want to know the history of Black people in this country, also keeping in mind that not all Black people were enslaved. I think that's a very important point that we need to understand. Our history was not all about slavery in this country. Roots. The miniseries, as well as the book, chronicles Alex Haley's roots, I believe from his mother's side, from the point that his relatives were kidnapped in Africa down to more of modern day history is impactful and it's powerful, as well as Amistad. This was about a slave revolt. These were Africans saying, no, we're not going to be enslaved, that this is not justice, this is not legal. And so they had a revolt, freed themselves, and was able to return to Africa. So these three books, and I think all are also movies, are imperative if you want a better understanding of the history of Black people in this country, which is also American history. Now, Ryan, you're a little younger than me. What was your experience about learning about Black history in school?
So, Richard, thank you so much for that very important question. I think that my experience, just in general, with actual American history in the school system was very jaded and slanted towards everything was great and everything was fine. It wasn't until, I mean, yeah, I got some foundational suggestions about slavery, the impact of some of these policies that have perpetuated even today to continue to cause suppression of minority communities. But overall, I remember hearing about Christopher Columbus came here to America and the Pilgrims, and they all sat down and had Thanksgiving. Are you fucking kidding me? That's not what happened. It was a massacre. It was a bloodbath. They murdered, raped, and mutilated indigenous people. That's how we got America. We are born from a disaster of a war. So when we look at actual history, not just what is being whitewashed more and more today, we see exactly what's going on. We see the true systemic issues that have been here since the very inception of our country. Shut up the people of color, keep the white people at the top of the hierarchy. I'm sorry to tell you this, that's not the way it's going to work anymore. We're past that. Whether you like it or not, we're going to continue to advance as a society. We're going to continue to support queer people of color. We're going to continue to support the rights of people of color. And we're not going to live in a country that is so damn racist. And I encourage you to read these books and continue to always educate yourself. Richard's done a great job at educating me more and more. If I don't know something, I don't just make an assumption. I get on a call with him and I have a discussion. Maybe you should try doing the same thing instead of saying, well, I don't think. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
It's nice to have a white man who's a pit bull. we, we need more of that. These are additional books that talk about Jim Crow, sharecroppers, apartheid. Destined to Witness is one of my all-time favorite books. This is about a boy whose father was African, his mother was German. His father returned to Africa, and shortly after that, we had the Nazi occupation in Germany. He was actually part of Hitler's youth, this young man, Hans J. Massaquoi. He talked about running in the streets and being chased by SS officers. How fearful his mother was, his white mother, that something was going to happen to her Black child under the Nazi regime. It is such a powerful book, and why someone hasn't made this a movie yet is beyond me. So if you want to learn more about someone whose roots didn't even start in the United States, he actually ended up coming to the United States, though, and fighting in World War II. And one of the things he pointed out, as sickening as this is, and really points to the issue of Black fatigue, is that prisoners of war, white prisoners of war, German prisoners of war, were allowed to eat in establishments where Black soldiers were not allowed to go. So when you hear politicians saying that America has never been a racist country, stop. Stop. America was built on racism, so it is so disingenuous. Another book by Isabel Wilkerson, The Warmth of Other Suns. Another powerful book by this woman who also wrote Caste. And Caste has been turned into a movie called Origin. So You don't even have to read the book if you don't want to. You can actually go see the movie. But The Warmth of Other Suns talks about the Great Migration. We're talking about when so many Black people left the struggles in the South and moved toward north to the north in hopes of better opportunities. And in most cases, that's just found another example of racism. But it's a powerful book to help us to understand that when we talk about the Great Migration, it wasn't that Black people came to the North and everything was fine. No, there were still lynchings. There was still, racism. There was still brutality against Black people by the white majority. And another one of my all-time favorite books is Kaffir Boy by Mark Mathabane. This was a little Black boy who was in South Africa and dreamed of the opportunity to go to college in the United States. So he learned to play tennis against all odds. When you hear about his dream, it is not even feasible for a little Black boy under apartheid to dream of going to an American university. It's such a beautiful and powerful story. I encourage people to read these books because it absolutely helps us to understand the reason why Black fatigue is a real thing. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
So I think that, thank you for that, Richard. I think that if people want to say, I think, and you haven't read these books, stop saying, I think, because you don't know what you're talking about. Again, I need to emphasize that. You thinking something does not make it true. I know that we have, a former president that can apparently think things up and declassify classified documents, but that's not the way it works in the real world. So read these books, get educated, continue to be educated over and over and over. Things change every day, and you can never learn enough about the incredible struggles that the Black and queer people of color communities go through on a daily basis. If you haven't walked in those shoes, then you don't know the true issues that are going on. So these books are a great way to get yourself understanding them.
Absolutely, Ryan. I would encourage white women who ever stood in front of a Black person and said, we are the same, to read these books. And then you would understand, no, we are not the same. It is not the same struggle, not even close.
I have to say that if I actually heard anybody that was not a person of color say that to a person of color, that might be fighting words in my view. Because that's
Yeah.
very
I
insulting.
mean, it's insulting. It is so disrespectful. I cannot tell you how many times that I've experienced that. Oh, well, we're all the same, which is not just another version of white fragility, to be honest. So I like me some books, especially books that gives us a better understanding about the struggle of being Black. Obviously, this is a artist, what's the word, conception. These men were not in the same room at the same time, but I love this picture. I saw it on somewhere on the internet. I'm like, oh my God, I love this. So we have uh, Barack Obama, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela. All of these men fought for equality and equity in their own ways. That also helps us to appreciate that Black people are not a monolith. These men have disagreed with each other, but they all worked in the struggle for equality and equity. Malcolm X's book, his biography by Alex Haley. If you don't want to read the book, Denzel Washington did a really good job in the movie playing Malcolm X. That was some of his best acting. So if you want to learn more about Malcolm X instead of what you've been told, that Malcolm X just hated white people, you'll learn about Malcolm X leaving the Nation of Islam over differences. Malcolm X was becoming more political. The Nation of Islam did not consider itself a political organization. Malcolm X started pointing things out, calling things out, like the infidelities of the Nation of Islam leader. And so he went off on his own. When Malcolm X went out on his own and he made the trip to Mecca, he recognized that Muslim people come in all different colors and that it did not make sense for him to hate white people. So he changed. And even though before he was critical of Martin Luther King and other Black civil rights leaders, he actually joined the civil rights movement. They don't teach us that in school. They just teach us that this was some radical man. Malcolm X said that he would be violent toward those who were violent against him, not initiating the violence, but responding to it. People don't talk about that. Martin Luther King writings, his speeches are so awe-inspiring, even to this day. So this book, I Have a Dream, about Martin Luther King speeches, absolutely get it. The man was a brilliant orator, so it is still going to be so fulfilling and so encouraging. And Nelson Mandela's biography, so powerful. I want people, we laud Mandela today, but at the time of his incarceration, Mandela was hated, and was a target for those who wanted to preserve apartheid. He was viewed as a terrorist. So today, everyone loves him. Oh, Nelson Mandela, but they hated this man. So civil rights, Obama becoming the first Black president of the United States, critical race theory, which only examines systemic racism and effects that it have on our society, particularly Black Americans. That is what it's about. It's not this scary thing to make white people feel guilty. It's not even taught in secondary schools. It's a college course, but we have villainized it to the point that we don't even want our children, whether they be Black or white, to learn about the effects of systemic racism. And of course, the Black Lives Matter movement. We had a Black Lives Matter sign in our yard, and we came home one day, it was gone. People are so hateful and so angry. Someone just ripped the sign out of the ground and stole it in our nice little neighborhood in White Rock, New Mexico, where we're told is the happiest place in the United States. Yet that kind of hatred and vitriol exists even here. Brian, tell me your experience, your perspective of Black Lives Matter and CRT.
So let me start out with Black Lives Matter. It was a very inevitable movement to start fighting back against the oppression in a way that holds, true value for understanding and conceptualization of the broader society. Everybody knows what Black Lives Matter is. It's to support Black people. It's because of the oppression of Black people. We can agree on those 2 points. Whether you like it or not is a different story, but it does achieve the goal of highlighting the issues from police brutality and from society at large. So Black Lives Matter is a successful organization and what it sought out to achieve, and it continues to be successful in achieving that. CRT, I cannot believe there's politicians running campaigns and winning that are vilifying CRT when it's not even it. Whenever I first heard it, I'm like, what the hell is that? I had to look it up, and I have a doctorate, so let that sink in for a second. I didn't really, I've heard of the term, but I haven't studied it for theory purposes because I wasn't in criminal justice or focusing on some kind of policy work that would, where it would be relevant for me to even know it. And that's really what it comes down to. This is for policymakers. This is a term that's used for law school students. A CRT is not some boogeyman. It's not a person. It's not a thing. It's just a framework, like any theory. It's a framework from which to guide decision making. And the problem, it comes down to this. White people are so fragile. You know what? Take that fragility and go somewhere with it. Because if you're not going to be part of the solution to advancing people of color, then you're just part of the problem. And if you can't stand up and do what is right, then get out of the way. Don't even do anything. Just get out of the way. It's fine if you don't want to do anything. Just don't do anything.
Absolutely.
I'm on fire tonight.
No, I love it. I love it. Because CRT is not about making little Johnny feel guilty. Yeah, I feel comfortable speaking for Black
Oh,
people. We don't care about white guilt. How does that benefit us? We're not trying to make anyone feel guilty.
what good does that do? Let's ask ourselves that question. What good does that do?
Exactly. Who does that benefit? It's not about making anyone feel guilty. It's about providing education and awareness. That's what it's about.
Agreed.
So what do we do? I mean, we can bitch and complain, but what do we actually do? As an organization and as decent human beings, what do? We can't fix anything without first acknowledging its existence. Do some research. Pick up the Black Fatigue, How Racism Erodes the Mind, Body, and Spirit. Read articles. Do some research. Educate yourself. But most importantly, do not deny the lived experience of another person, especially if it's an experience that you can't even relate to. As Black people, we don't need your validation of racism for legitimacy. As I mentioned, the people going to speak, Dr. Phil said it wasn't racist. This person said it wasn't racist. How would they know? It's not their experience. This is not a court of law. We do not have to prove anything to anyone. As Black people, we know these things exist. We know racism exists because we experience it on a daily basis. Even when it's so-called microaggressions, even when people are being racially insensitive, even perceived racism, all cause a harmful effect on the psyche as well as the body of Black Americans. And it's important to remember, refusing to discuss something isn't going to make it go away. It only perpetuates the issue. So if a Black person is sharing their experience, just listen. A person of color is saying, look, it's hard to be a person of color in this day and time. Don't tell them, well, things are better. How would you know? It's not your experience. So stop it. Just listen. We don't need you to tell us what is and what isn't racism. Just listen to what we're saying. I'm not even asking you to agree. You don't have to agree. Just listen. And you might actually learn something. So this was just a tidbit, Ryan. Just a little, dabble to yes, we just want to, whet the appetite. We definitely want to have more of these discussions. That certainly wasn't enough. But please pick up these books. I mentioned one of the books by Isabel Wilkerson, The Warmth of Other Suns, but she also have an incredibly powerful book called Caste, as I mentioned, that really helps us to understand this goes beyond racism. This is about the social hierarchy, where it puts some people, a group of people, on top, and it perpetuates those below stepping on others in a hope to reach that top echelon. It's a problem in all societies. So it's not just a white thing. It's not even a white thing. It is a supremacy thing. It is a social hierarchy thing. Those are the things we need to take into consideration. Well, thank you, Ryan. Thank you for being my partner in crime. Thank you for being my pit bull. I appreciate that. I adore you. And I want us to continue to do this work because in order for us to make things better, we got to work together. Ripping each other apart is not going to resolve anything. It's only going to make matters worse. We've seen whole world powers topple because people could not figure out a way to peacefully coexist. So regardless of how you feel, how one might feel, it behooves us as a society to figure out a way to peacefully coexist. So until next time, to the next time we have our Perspective podcast, be well, everyone.